Hello everybody and welcome back. Today I'm going to make a quick video with some resume writing tips and then go through with a tutorial on actually writing up a mock resume. Now before we get started, I want to go through the fundamentals just of things to keep on the back burner or on the back of your mind as you're going through this process of either writing or revising your resume. Now, the first step is to know your audience. This may sound obvious, but often if you're creating your resume, you could be catering it to a staffing agency as well as to hiring managers, HR professionals. So one thing that I learned from recruiting is sometimes these resumes could go to individuals that are more of like an HR manager that may not be as technical as some of the actual like hiring individuals. So for example, if you have someone that works in HR that reviews resumes first, you may want to try to cater the resume to them if you're going for a higher level IT job. But if you're going to the hiring manager directly, then it may be worthwhile to try to use verbiage a little bit more consistent with their caliber and their level of work as it relates to essentially your experience. So we'll go more into detail into this later. But I want to go to step 2, which is use verbiage that is relevant to the job and your experience. So this ties into the first step, which is just making sure that if it's a technical job that you're not trying to oversimplify the concepts, but also try to make sure that you're explaining everything concisely, which is step 3. Make sure that your relevant experience is thoroughly and concisely represented and explained. So if you honestly just take a look at your job titles and then just assume that if you were a network engineer or a customer service representative or whatever the case may be, if you just assume that the hiring manager knows what you did and you just kind of give some generic bullet points, it's going to make it very difficult to stand out. After all, anyone can look up job descriptions for things that you've done in the past, but they really want to know, like, how is this relevant? And it's your job to paint that picture for them. So next, we're going to go ahead and jump into creating a sample resume and kind of highlight a couple of other tips and tricks. Now, here's a sample resume we're going to get to shortly. But before we jump into this, we're going to look through some job boards to figure out our target audience and also better understand the tone and how we're going to essentially portray who we are and what we know how to do. Now, we're not going to have a ton of detail here because honestly, this is going to be something you're going to need to make relevant to what you've done. So every job, every bullet point, it's going to be different for all of you. But again, it's making sure that you understand how to accurately portray your experience. Now, before we jump into a couple job boards, I do want to let you know I'm going to have a link in the description to a Fiverr website or a Fiverr profile where I'm offering a couple of different services. So I'm offering a pretty affordable resume writing service. You have the option to choose from just a simple resume review. I'll write a resume from scratch for you, and I will also do mock interviews with individuals, just trying to increase the accessibility of information like this and really try to get people as prepared as possible to get into the workforce or make their way through it. So let's go ahead and get started looking into some of those job boards. All right, now that we have covered those points, we're going to try to find a sample job or two, and then we're going to go ahead and start writing or critiquing a resume. So we are going to go to Indeed as well as Dice, and we're going to find let's just say a customer service job, and then we're going to have a technical job. And what we'll do is we'll create the customer service job and say that that was something we worked a couple years ago and then we moved into IT, so we can use like job experience from 2 different roles and make it relevant to both of these jobs in a way. So what we're going to do is if we were to find, let's just say we were to look for customer service jobs on Indeed. We'll just pull up this first result here because this is how we're developing our tone and making sure that the key takeaways from our resume highlight the fact that we can actually do this job. So you'll see call center, and often at the top of these you're going to see maybe they're going to have a mission statement, so it doesn't hurt to try to have an objective section for something like that and let them know that you're highly motivated and ambitious, etc., and try to cater to the common points there. Then as you scroll down, we're going to look at major tasks. So you're going to see screen for safety concerns, make transfers, promote call empowerment. So maybe if you have call center experience, you want to highlight in this essentially in your resume that you have similar experience. Maybe you're going to see something like provide information and referrals. You're going to see follow-up calls. So you're going to want to make sure that you highlight how you've done something similar. Now, let's just say you go to this role here because you don't want to have to create a new resume for every single job. So you're going to try to find those commonalities, like what's common with this one as well as the other one. So customer service. So you're going to want to highlight the fact that if you worked in retail, that you interacted with customers, maybe you rang them up, did basic cash handling functions, things of that nature. So as you start to read these job descriptions, you'll see what they want, what they're looking for, and you can basically try to cater your resume to that. Now with Dice, I went ahead and chose a much more technical role. So here you're going to see the job description, which starts out with the typical like mission statement, or do you want to get into an exciting career doing blank? And then it'll slowly taper into here's what we're looking for. So what you're going to want to really focus in on something like this is what education is required, if any. Some companies refuse to hire without a bachelor's degree, for example. Not all, but if that's something you have, make sure it's on your resume somewhere. Now, you're also going to want to make note of any required certifications. Some jobs will require that. So you want to make sure that if you have the certification or something relevant, that is highlighted. And above all else, make sure it's spelled correctly and presented in the way that it is presented on the actual job description. It never hurts to put the acronym and then to spell the word out. Just in case, the more verbiage you have on your resume, the more relevant you're going to be in job searches. I also want to note, when you see some of these job postings online, you may not necessarily know unless you're doing your research whether it's posted by a company or a recruiting agency or a staffing agency. So if you're trying to apply to a specific position, bear in mind that it is very, very common when people are searching for resumes to use these as keywords, anything in this section here. So any of this could be a keyword, so the more of it that's on your resume, the more relevant you'll be in a search. But a second point to that is, if it's an HR manager that may not be directly involved with the job itself, this is also going to be their way of identifying whether or not you can do the job. How much of this appears on your resume? It's different if you're applying directly to a hiring manager who knows exactly how to take the information from your resume and apply it. But if you're maybe applying to someone who's less technical, you're going to want to make sure that the verbiage is there to make you appear relevant. So again, that's part of that knowing your audience. Next, just like a job description, your resume itself is going to highlight qualifications. Like, this says what you need to have to work there, and in your resume, this section is going to say what you've done that makes you relevant in a similar way. So we're going to go ahead and jump into a sample resume that I started and kind of cover the reason it's structured this way. So I always recommend the name front and center. We're going to go over some templates after this because this is a plain resume, but because we're not going for more of like a marketing or art-oriented position, this is going to be okay. So we're going to say that this is for John Doe. And the first thing I'm hoping most people notice is all of this text is consistent. So we don't have any weird formatting. There is no spacing issues. It's consistent across. I've seen resumes that have like every other line maybe different fonts, or people may forget or not realize that they really aren't checking on like the paragraph settings. So when you're done with your resume, I recommend trying to create consistent formatting. So once you've written the whole thing, you can do typical Control-A on a Windows computer. Go to paragraph and just make sure you don't have any weird spacing issues. So single spaced if that's what you need. No weird spacing before or after any certain lines. I'll try to make sure that all of it's Times New Roman or something similar. Maybe we want to go with 11-point font. And then I'll make the name stand out just a little bit. Now, if you're going to use like bold font for headings, make it consistent. If you were to say that the skills section is bold and then skip over experience and then go to certifications and say this is bold, this is not going to be a good look for a prospective employer. So make sure that consistency and that the rules make sense. So if we bold the headings, it wouldn't hurt to bold the name and the city. I don't like to put apartment or house here just because I really don't like that information being as public. So for example, if you're applying around to jobs very actively, there are some people out there who will put up fake job posts and they're basically just fishing for information. So I try to keep it vague whenever I can. So I'll put name, city, and state. So we're just going to use Denver, Colorado as an example. Sample phone number, sample email address. Now, another thing, when you're posting these online, put a phone number and email address, A, that you can be reached at, but B, that you're actually going to answer and check up on. If you don't put a phone number and you want everything to come through email, you'll be surprised how many hits you're going to get, but a lot of it's going to be filtered through spam or a variety of other issues that could come up. And in all honesty, just having a phone number very, very helps. I know a lot of people get a lot of spam calls, but if you're looking for a job and you put a phone number and you're scared to pick up the phone, then you're banking on the fact that someone's going to call you and leave a clear voicemail that explains exactly what they want. And employers can be busy. So just make sure that, if you're going to be picky in these areas, then, expect a response that may not always be along the lines of what exactly you want. Now, when we mentioned earlier there was an objective section, some companies like this, some don't. It's pretty simple to make something like this, and you can see a lot of templates online. So if you were to put objective or professional objective, and then what exactly you kind of highlights you. So very common for like a customer service role, for example, for people to put highly motivated customer service professional with 3 years of experience. And then you could put doing blank. So what were you doing? 3 years of experience, with cash handling functions or management. So we'll just put in management. Now, remember consistency. So we are going to bold this heading. Everything else is underlined. So we're probably going to want to underline this one as well. And then we're going to want to make sure that we have more to it. Never just have one sentence. Try to keep it at least 3 to 4 if you have an objective section. It's not a huge requirement, and some people honestly don't like it. So if that's you, don't put it. Skills, you can put summary of skills, professional skills, just skills. What I did here is I highlighted some pretty common customer service skills on the left, and on the right I got started on the more technical skills. And what I did for these was I pulled from the job description. So if you see in this description, we're reading through and we see, okay, you need these certifications, then we're going to make sure that that is in our certification section. Now, proven network engineer with hands-on experience with network architecture and design. So I put networking protocols, network traffic analysis, and VMware. That I found throughout the description here. And that's honestly, in IT, you're going to need to be much more specific than that, but it's just an example. So in the resume, you'll see keywords throughout. So I see VMware, vCenter, vSphere, and then you're going to see some of the other keywords. So I use that like a checklist. How much of that did you highlight in some way here? So that's what this section is going to be for. And then experience. So this could be professional experience, just experience, whatever you feel the need to put. So here you're going to put the company, the location, and the job title. Now, if you're going to have this right here, the date, I highly recommend always putting the date you started and the date you finished, and at least include the month and year. The day is not really necessary, but if you say 2019 to 2020, I don't know if you started in January, in February, or in December. So if you say 2019 to 2020, if you started in December of 2019 and ended in January of 2020, you only worked there 2 months, potentially even less. So be specific, because when I was in recruiting, if I saw that, sometimes it would appear as if people were trying to hide gaps. So just make sure that you are honest and truthful about this, because it always comes out in an interview anyway. Now, a different way you could structure this if you want is put the date over here, for example. And we can keep this consistent, make sure that everything lines up. And you can even bold certain things if you would like. So maybe bold the location and the company, or if you want to leave it as is, completely fine as well. Now for this experience section, I put a customer service position here, and I put a networking engineer role here. Now the first mistake I would see is this looks like it's backwards, because this should be the experience prior to, and I have seen people that have put the first job they worked, and then as you read down the resume, it's like a timeline from the first role ever to the most recent position you've worked. I do not recommend doing that. Most relevant should always go first. So in this case, we're going to make this 2014 to 2015. And then this is 2015 to 2021. So the most recent jobs at the top. Now we put an example company and an example job title. Now we're going to get into the meat of what we were doing. So this is a very basic and generic line. Only you are going to be the one that can determine what specifically needs to go here. I can give generic examples, but this is specific to what you were actually doing. If you were helping with customers, think of a couple examples of what you were doing and try to find a theme. Like, if you were helping customers, what were you helping them do? Were you solving problems for them? Were you helping with conflict resolution as a manager? Were you helping with de-escalating? Like, what were you doing that was valuable to the company? And not just a situational example, but a common theme. So, assisted with architecture and design for a large enterprise level networking system. This is for a more technical position. But first thing is, if you don't elaborate on this, it can lead to more questions than answers. I mean, what exactly were you doing? What was the hardware? What was the software? So be specific when you do things like this. And then assisted with developing and implementing networking protocols, and I just put ... So if you're working with specific protocols or specific hardware, don't be scared to elaborate on it. And for more technical roles that you may have worked at for longer periods of time, if you want, you could even break it down a little bit further. So for example, if you got promoted a couple times. So let's just say you started out as a networking engineer, you moved to, let's just say, so what we're going to do is we're going to copy this actual job title here. And we're just going to say that this is your current position. So we will go ahead and paste this here. And maybe this is what you were doing most recently, but maybe you were promoted. Maybe before this you were working as a senior network engineer. So here you would want to put bullet points about, helped with blank. And then what I would recommend is you need to show a timeline. So if you need to, off to the side, feel free to put from let's just say 10/2018 to 10-2019. And to keep dates consistent and make this make sense, what we'll do is we'll go to 2015-2019. And then for this role, we'll go 10-2019 to 10-2021. Now, it can look a little confusing. You can space this out if you need to and you think it improves readability. But the way that I see this is, this is how long you worked at Cisco, for example. But this is how long you worked at this job. And this was how long you worked at this job. And it shows a natural and clear career trajectory similar to how a LinkedIn profile would show it. And then down here you can see target. You worked there from this date at this location as a cashier. So if this role was remote, for example, that explains to a prospective employer, all right, I'm set up to work remotely. Maybe I have the technical tools at home to do whatever it is that I need to do. And if you're working at Target on site, then it lets them know, okay, this individual is probably in the Denver, Colorado area, and they have held a similar job title. And then for a more customer service-oriented job, this is generic verbiage again, but it's a great way to get started. So this is where you're going to pull those themes from those really like the job descriptions we read. So assisted with answering all product-related inquiries. And then you could put additional verbiage like, and catered sales tactics to the consumer. So you're putting in some generic verbiage here. Probably not the best way to word it, but you're explaining, because those last two jobs had some sales-related like descriptions and requirements. You're making sure that that's highlighted there. Next, we get to education and certifications. If you need to split this up into two different sections, feel free. And if you're a recent graduate, or maybe you think that the education is more relevant, feel free to put this section above experience. But if you think your most recent job titles are really going to pop, then I always recommend following this flow. So for education, you can put your university or high school or whatever the case is. This is going to be the year you graduated. I don't really think you need the dates attended. As long as they see a date here, they usually assume that you graduated. But what I don't like seeing, especially in the recruiting world, because some companies require a degree or a diploma, I'll often see people put this here, and then I realize when I call them that they attended in 2011, but they did not actually graduate. So make sure that you're just being open and honest, because this does come out during an interview. If a degree is required, they will end up asking. Now, lastly, certifications. So the last role we were looking at required a Security Plus. So if you have that, you can throw it here. And make sure you spell it correctly. There's a reason I do not put spelling in my summary of skills section. Now, this is going to be a very terrible example, but it just kind of highlights a general flow and what's necessary. The summary of skills section, a lot of this isn't necessarily going to be something that, like, this is something that people are going to assume that you have skills with. For example, if you were a networking engineer, you're probably going to have experience with networking protocols. But what this does is it helps when individuals are searching. If I'm a recruiter and I know for a fact that I need a VMware engineer, VMware is going to be in my search, which means this resume is going to be closer to the top. And the more networking related search criteria I enter, the more relevant it's going to be based on how specific you are. If you say that you were a networking engineer and all you say is I assisted with developing network infrastructure, if you don't tell me what hardware you were working with or what you were actually doing, A, your resume is not going to appear as close to the top, and B, sometimes it can come across as if you don't really have the ability to accurately portray what you did in your previous roles. Same thing with customer service. Don't put one-liners. So if I'm looking for a cashier or a customer service rep, I don't want to see this. Cash handling, management. Like, I need to know that you can clearly articulate what you've done. And so that's why I would always recommend sentences, proper grammar, proper punctuation, proper spelling. Now, this is going to be, let's just say, our sample resume. And then what we are going to do is we're going to now go to File, then we are going to click New. And we're going to create a sample resume, or we're just going to look at some templates, basically. So let's just say you see the search result. We're going to type in resume. Now, biggest recommendation here. First, as interesting as it may sound, I've seen a lot of resumes that are just a picture, like a screenshot. Don't put that online. It is it's impossible to do a keyword search on a resume that's just a picture. Secondly, this is where you need to know your audience. If you're going into marketing or more of an artsy-oriented position, you're going to want something that's a little flashier, maybe has a little bit more color to it. If you're going finance and IT, you're going to want something that has the ability to enter in more content like certifications and make it all relevant. So if you choose something like this, you're going to have the ability to present much more information side by side. So if you have your experience and skills, if you remember on our previous resume example, this was 2 separate sections. But here, all I have to do is read one line all the way across. So depending on how you feel you can portray it, this may be a format that's a little bit better. So make sure that you have the ability to type in what you were doing. Just typing in that you worked in a specific job at a specific company does not highlight your experience. So that's really all that I have for you. The last thing I do want to note is in the description, I'm going to be posting a link to my Fiverr profile. So I'm trying to make a very, very affordable resume editing service where, depending on what you're looking for, I can either review and revise your resume for you, or if you would like, I'd be more than happy to create a resume for you from scratch. And I'm even setting up mock interviews where I'll basically be doing a sample 25-minute Zoom interview and kind of critiquing your performance and making recommendations for you moving forward. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content.